It's a significant judgment by the Supreme Court, one that will likely go down in history books. The top court has pulled up the central government over its decision to ban Malayalam news channel MediaOne. Not only has the ban been lifted, there were some scathing comments that came to the government as well. The court said that critical views of a media organization cannot be termed anti-national. In other words, anti-government is not anti-national. Let me repeat this. This is what the Supreme Court is saying. The Supreme Court is saying anti-government is not anti-national. It also said that an independent press is necessary for a robust democracy. The court then proceeded to talk about the sealed cover process. The government said the Supreme Court has made it a habit. In fact, the Supreme Court is saying that the government has made it a habit of submitting reports in sealed covers on grounds of national security. But the court wants to regulate that process now. It wants the centre to first convince the court that national security concerns override principles of natural justice. Only then, says the Supreme Court, will sealed covers be permitted. The court says national security claims cannot be raised in thin air. I'm repeating that. This is a very significant statement coming in from the government, from the court. The court saying national security claims cannot be raised in thin air by the government. That was the word used by the Supreme Court, thin air. It also blamed the Home Ministry for raising national security claims in a cavalier manner, quote unquote, in the MediaOne case. It said that the state is using the plea of national security to deny citizens. Okay, a quick background to the case. The channel was banned in January 2022 for criticizing the CAA and NRC. The government revoked their security clearance over alleged concerns of national security. The Kerala High Court had upheld that decision, but that has now been reversed by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has asked the government to issue broadcasting licenses to MediaOne within 4 weeks. Let's try and go across to our reporters and to our guests on why this judgment, this is not a mere observation, ladies and gentlemen, this is a judgment, why it is so important to the health of India's democracy. Harish, I'm coming to you first. I want to know from you, what was the argument made in court by the government?
Yes, in fact, Shreya, as you rightly put, very significant judgment, more than the judgment, the observations, the implications of various facets of the state action. And remember, while quashing the order by which Centre refused the security clearance to Malayalam channel MediaOne, which is owned by Jamaat-e-Islami, the Supreme Court has spoken on 3 aspects basically. Number 1, on national security and how it is used by the centre to conceal information and to provoke a non-transparent judicial proceeding. Number 2, on the freedom of the press. Number 3, Supreme Court has slammed the sealed cover jurisprudence. Remember, the Jamaat, this MediaOne channel was banned immediately after the reportage on harsh criticism of the crackdown on anti-CAA protest. Not only that, several, in fact, several judgments which are of the Supreme Court and High Court which had gone in favor of the government and NRC. And so the Supreme Court has said that reports critical of the government does not mean it is anti-establishment or even on anti-national. Anti-establishment does not mean it is anti-national, and free press is very essential for a robust democracy, and also said that this view of the government that calling anti-government remarks of a particular media channel as anti-national presumes there is an inbuilt presumption that every media channel should toe the government line, should support the government. Then there are several other remarks saying that the Supreme Court has in fact come down heavily on the Kerala High Court for upholding the centre's decision to deny the MediaOne channel the several, in fact, security clearance on the basis of sealed cover information submitted by the government,
Okay.
and said that and has laid down severe strict norms for courts to follow sealed cover jurisprudence, and said that first the center should convince the court that there is a national security issue and prove that national security overrides natural justice. So several observations coming in, and as you rightly said, these are not obiter dicta. These have been written down in the judgment, in the voluminous judgment. In fact, 20 minutes of the Chief Justice read out the operative portion of the judgment for 20 minutes today. It was a marathon reading. Chief Justice, in fact, wanted to send across clear message on these three aspects, as I said earlier: freedom of the press, and when should a sealed cover procedure be followed, and number three, this argument that
Okay.
in fact, a particular media channel being anti-government does not mean anti-national.
Okay. Okay, Harish, I'll request you to stay on because we'll quickly go across to our guests who are joining us this afternoon as well, and I'm going to request Harish you to stay with us. Before I go to my guests, let me quickly introduce them to you. Tehseen Poonawala is a political analyst, KV Dhananjay is an advocate of the Supreme Court, and Madhavan Narayan is a senior journalist. All three joining us. We'll also have voices from the world of journalism joining us as well. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I want to read out first an operative part of today's judgment for our viewers to get a better sense of what exactly the court has said. The court says, the critical views of the channel media, one on policies of the government, cannot be termed anti-establishment. The use of such a terminology itself represents an expectation that the press must support the establishment. The action of the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting by denying your security clearance to a media channel on the basis of the views of the channel is constitutionally entitled to hold, produces a chilling effect on free speech and in particularly on press freedom. So these are very, very significant observations that are coming in from the Supreme Court. Before I go to my guests, let me quickly go across to senior journalist Neeraja Chaudhary, who's joining us on the broadcast. Neeraja ji, if you've managed to take a look at the copy of the judgment, or if at least the excerpts that are coming out now, what do you make of what the Supreme Court has said, and why saying it was so necessary in the times we live in?
Look, this is a very clear reiteration of the constitutional position that, the executive plays a role, the parliament, legislature plays its role, the media is supposed to play its role. And it is supposed to, as I keep saying, show the mirror to the government. The idea is to hold the government to account so that, redressals of things going wrong can take place. I mean, they're not adversaries. It's not that the media is an adversary to the government, but its role is to criticize. And the Supreme Court, the court has held it very clearly that criticizing policies of the government does not mean being anti-establishment or against the government. It's all these three institutions working in step to make democracy much more meaningful, much more effective, and able to deliver. So I think it's a reiteration of position, and it needed to be said.
It needed to be said, and it needed to be said in the times we live in, as I said. Madhavan Narayan, thank you, Neeraja ji, for joining us. Madhavan Narayan, you're a senior journalist yourself. Criticizing the government, showing a mirror to the establishment is the job of the media. Mm-hmm. How did criticism then become enmity, dushmani? Because that is how it is now, right? That you're either with us or you're against us, which is why what the Supreme Court has said today assumes much more significance.
Yeah, I think, Shreya, I am inventing new words to really understand the old reality, because that's the only way to explain to people what's really going on. We are a democratic republic, and not a state preceding a republic, which is what old kings and royal courts used to have. You had a king and you had a court and you had enemies of the state. So I call it statism. What we have now is republicanism, where the people are supreme. Freedom of the expression is guaranteed by the constitution, and the constitution is superior even to parliament. That is very important to understand. Forget about one government banning a media channel. Even if parliament passes a resolution, it cannot go against the freedom of expression. And there is already an Official Secrets Act there to guard exceptional cases for national security purposes. And even if MediaOne theoretically had some secrets, which it doesn't, it could have been restricted on a specific issue, on a specific official secret issue. Using a license permit quota raj regime to prohibit a channel is very clearly a fundamental attack on a fundamental right of the constitution, in which only the Supreme Court of India is the final authority, and the court has spoken unequivocally and unambiguously. And to that extent, it is very, very clear that the ruling party is like a tenant in parliament, which is looking after the government for 5 years. And its job is to govern the country. It is to take overall all-pervading responsibility based on arbitrary grounds. And that's what seems to be happening when you equate the ruling party with the government with the state with the country, and anything spoken against the ruling party is equated with talking against the country. And even talking against the country is allowed on grounds of principle in India, whether it is reflecting Indian values or not, whether it reflects the constitution or not. These are matters of free speech. So there is plenty of room. And to actually crack down on one channel or media entity is a very clear case of something reminding us of the emergency. Please remember, even when the emergency was imposed with the full constitutional powers of a 2/3 majority in parliament, even that was looked down upon. So this is much more draconian. And last but not the least, let me say the CAA and the NRC are matters before the Supreme Court, the Citizens Amendment Act, the Citizenship Amendment Act. So therefore, you cannot arbitrarily equate something which is already under dispute to stop the publication of something or prohibit a channel. Therefore, there is absolutely no case. Now, India doesn't have a First Amendment like the US, but right to freedom of expression is a fundamental right, and that the media is covered completely by that right. The media entities have every citizen's right. And also, it's important to know that the government is accountable to the media to the extent that media are also citizens. And to that extent, holding somebody who holds you accountable as anti-national is itself something that needs to be called into doubt. All this very clearly shows that the Supreme Court has spoken
for the government to
think,
for the government to say, it's good that the Supreme Court has spoken unambiguously, and it is saying something that I think all of us hold very dearly, that I love my country, I will die for it. I will do anything for my country. I may or may not like my government, and I will definitely kill myself for it or die for it. But the government is not the country. The government is not the nation. I have a right as a person from the press, as a citizen of this country, to criticize what my government does. This is, after all, my government as well. And what is the job of the press?
Yeah.
The job of the press is to hold a mirror to the government.
Exactly.
Sometimes the criticism is warranted, sometimes it is not warranted, but it's our job. Our job is not to do bhakti. Our job is not to do vah-vai.
Let me say something.
When people in power ask you, do you only see negative things happening in this government? Do you see no positive things? Of course, there are positive things happening as well. Who's denying that? But that's not our job.
Exactly.
Our job is to hold a mirror whenever something is going wrong. Can you give me a minute,
let me just
Mr. Narayan? Because just give me a minute.
1 second, please. I just want to say one thing to make things clearer to your viewers who may not be very adept at constitutional matters. That if you're playing a game of cricket, a player cannot ban a scorer, a player cannot ban an umpire, a player cannot ban somebody who's actually operating the third umpire's machine. And this is analogous. Banning a channel is like trying to ban scorers or scorekeepers. Right?
Minute, I'm going back to the Supreme Court because Harish continues to be there. Yeah, absolutely. Harish continues to be outside the Supreme Court. And I just want to go back to him on this entire issue of sealed covers, because this is not the first time that the Supreme Court is saying something, something not very positive about sealed covers here. Harish, just come in here. The Supreme Court had recently refused to take that whole sealed cover business in the Adani Hindenburg report. Now again, they have had some negative things to say about sealed covers. Where did this sealed cover discussion come into the entire judgment and into the play of arguments that were made today?
Yes, Shreya, remember the Supreme Court has clearly criticized the Kerala High Court for upholding the information given to it by the central government while upholding its decision to deny security clearance, which in fact resulted in a ban of the operation of the channel. So Supreme Court has said once again that reiterated in fact that the concept of sealed cover jurisprudence in fact negates the entire concept of transparent judicial proceeding, and it's against the principle of natural justice and fair hearing. Remember, this is not the first time that the Chief Justice of India, D.Y. Chandrachud, has pulled up the center for submitting seal covers. This has happened in the Adani Hindenburg matter also, where the center wants to submit certain names of people who it wanted to be included in the experts panel in a seal cover. Supreme Court has refused to take that seal cover and said that we will appoint the expert committee. We will decide who all will be the constituents and comprise of in the constituents of the expert committee. Likewise, in the OROP, one rank, one pension matter also, Supreme Court had refused to take the status report being filed regarding the implementation of OROP. Center wanted to give it in a sealed cover. Supreme Court refused to take. No, tell us how. It bluntly told the Attorney General R. Venkatramaneni that you either read out the contents of the affidavit loudly in the court or you just take it back. Very, very serious comments had come in even during the OROP case. Remember, Shreya, even in the Rafale case, even in the Assam NRC case, even in the Pegasus case, even in some more other cases like Pegasus, Supreme Court had then Chief Justices had invited sealed cover reports from the government, which had evoked a lot of protest and criticism of the Supreme Court. So now the new Chief Justice D.Y. Chandrachud is very cautious that we will not accept sealed cover in this manner, in this fashion. First, we have laid down guidelines in this judgment that that the center should convince that this is actually an issue of national security, compromises the sovereignty, security and integrity of the country, the contents of the affidavit. Otherwise, and also once it is convinced, we have to prove that national security has supersedes the natural justice principle. So very important observations coming in this MediaOne judgment on why courts should avoid taking sealed cover affidavits from the central governments and state governments. Back to you.
Also, the word they are using is don't pull out national security issues from thin air. That is something that the court has said. Tehseen Poonawalla, come in here and what you make of this judgment. And before you do, let me just quote a part of that judgment for our viewers about what the Supreme Court is saying about the free press. They say the press has a duty to speak truth and present citizens with hard facts, enabling them to make choices that prepare democracy in the right direction. The restriction on the freedom of the press compels citizens to think along the same tangent. A homogenized view on issues that range from socio-economic polity to political ideologies would pose a grave danger to society and to democracy. This is what the Supreme Court has said. Why is what the Supreme Court has said today, Tehseen, in your view, and the way it has ruled, the way it has in the MediaOne case, why do you think it's so significant to the health of India's democracy and to the health of India's press, more importantly?
Thank you, Shreya, for having me. Good afternoon to you, to my fellow panelists, and to all your viewers. And let me start from where Mr. Narayan left. The first three words of our constitution is we the people. We the people are supreme. No prime minister, no president, No Supreme Court, no Supreme Court judge is supreme, no chief minister supreme. We, the people, are supreme. That's the first three words of our constitution. And this constitution's basic structure guarantees us right to life, liberty, equality, and free speech. Even when the BJP or its supporters, and I'm going to be very direct here, the union government and its supporters quote 19.2, which is restriction of free speech, that is in the rarest of rare cases, and there has to be absolute justification. So you cannot go about stifling media freedom. Criticism of the government is not criticism of India. I do not like this present government, and I am very proud to be Indian. So the government needs to understand it. But there are certain fundamental questions that we need to ask regarding the MediaOne TV judgment, bowing before the Kerala High Court. What compelled the judges to accept the seal cover of the union government? What compelled them to think that what is put in the seal cover threatens national security? And how and when will these judges also be held accountable? Yes, the Honorable Chief Justice of India has turned it around, has said that this arbitrary use of denying license, which is reminiscence of a age where you control, should go. Media must have a right to report. But let's ask some questions of the Kerala High Court. How did it accept it? What did it go? What went through it? Even the bar to which it is answerable, the High Court, is unfortunately mute. And I think that part of the system is when courts stop listening to what the government says on a wide range of issues, that this constitutes national security. National security is very important, but it can't just be made out of thin air. Anything and everything can't be national security. Somebody reporting on how a midday meal is, for lack of another word, not going properly, cannot be a national security act, cannot be treason. And like the earlier panelists said, if there was something in their report that did affect national security, you could request the channel to drop that part. You cannot blank out everything. Now, I have challenged the CA in the Honorable Supreme Court. I'm a petitioner. Am I anti-national? Am I the one who's anti my country? So this argument needs to stop. There is one more thing that's very, very worrying. The most honorable Vice President of India and Chairperson of the Rajya Sabha said about the Keshavananda Bharti judgment, and you have an advocate from the Supreme Court, and you have Mr. Narayan who understands the Constitution, that, you know, he was critical of it. Now, I don't know anyone in the world that has been critical of this particular judgment. This particular judgment guards the basic structure of the Constitution. And the Vice President of India, who himself is a distinguished lawyer, went on to say, Parliament is supreme. Now, that is a very, 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 very scary argument to make. And it's very scary that somebody sitting in the position of the Vice President of India and Chairperson of Rajya Sabha is making statements that are contrary to our Constitution. And therefore, it is something that we need to call out. It is something that the courts need to take up. I hope the courts can even move a step further and take on the Honorable Law Minister of India, who accused some Honorable Supreme Court judges of being anti-national. This kind of remarks made casually by people in positions of power must stop. I'll just end with one example, since a cricket example was given. Imagine yourself in a boxing ring. You're fighting a heavyweight champion because the government is a heavyweight. Now imagine your hands are tied behind and you're blindfolded. How do you expect to win? That is what a seal cover does to a petitioner. It takes away his or her right to a free and fair trial, guaranteed to us under our Constitution, guaranteed to us under Article 14. And I think that is absolutely fundamental to what the Supreme Court has said.
Because the other side simply doesn't know what arguments the government is making. Now, we don't know what arguments the government made in the sealed cover to the Kerala High Court. And should the Kerala High Court and its judges be questioned over why they decided to uphold the centre's ban on MediaOne? Maybe that will happen. But let me just get in Dhananjay, KV Dhananjay here into the conversation as well. KV Dhananjay, you know, the Supreme Court has said many things today. Is there any argument against what they are saying? Because what they seem to be saying is logical, and what they seem to be saying is something that needs to be said. Because the line between the government and the nation somehow has blurred, at least in the minds of the government. You criticize us like MediaOne did as far as NRC and CA is concerned. Well, you're anti-government, which means you're anti-national. There is national security involved. We are therefore taking away your license. How and when did this line get blurred?
Well, the judgment today does many things, one of which is to greatly embarrass the judges in the Kerala High Court who went on to treat the government's sealed cover as if it were gospel. This is how churches are run. Churches are run on the basis of faith. But a court of law is not a place that should be run like a church. A single judge of the Kerala High Court essentially said that he's looked into the files that were sent or provided by the government of India. And in those files, he sees there is a good national security argument, and he will not disclose what's in that file. And he therefore says that I will uphold the order of revocation. A division bench of the Kerala High Court does the same thing. Now, those very files also come before the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court says is this is a very cavalier manner in which you make your decisions. Now, in that file, there were two aspects. One aspect was that the company which runs the MediaOne channel. Now, by the way, the MediaOne is the name of a brand. So there is always a legal entity that runs or that owns this brand. So there was a company, and the government of India was saying in a sealed cover that the shareholders in this company have links to Jamaat-e-Hind, Jamaat-e-Islami, Hind Islami. As the Supreme Court says, where is the material to show that the shareholders are connected to that organization? Now the court is asking this basic question. And unfortunately, the judges of the Kerala High Court did not even bother to ask this basic question. And that, I think, is a tragedy. What the Supreme Court says today is, of course, what any constitutional lawyer or scholar would have expected. So they are not going to be too pleased with what came out because this would be the norm in a democratic and a functioning democracy. But what actually happened before the Kerala High Court was in fact such that this would send a chilling effect, or this would create a chilling effect on several other TV organizations.
Correct.
Now, there are a number of scholars who say that the media, the television landscape is such that a lot of them seem to be like propaganda. And it's possibly because they believe if not for acting like a propaganda, they too could be shut down. And if they were to be shut down, no one can just go to the Supreme Court. They have to go to their High Court. And look at what happened in the High Court. A single judge and a division bench, they were essentially saying that they relied on judgments of the Supreme Court to deny this channel the basic principle of natural justice. The channel or the owner of the channel simply did not know what were the grounds. And the other context why the license was revoked was that this channel was critical of the policies of the central government. Now, what were the policies of the central government? The central government was saying that they were critical of the CAA, they were critical of the electoral bonds and so on and so forth. And the Supreme Court says they in fact have a kind of a duty to be critical where they believe they ought to be critical. So how do you in fact treat that as a basis for revoking their license? Now, I'm surprised that 75 years after we've had our constitution, it is important for the Supreme Court to remind the central government that central government cannot do the things that they've just done. A media organization, unlike a common citizen, is placed on a much higher pedestal. And if the government were to put restrictions on a media organization, then that restriction has a good amount of chilling effect. And this is a government. This is a government that's renewed every 5 years after an election. And this is not the British government of the 15th or the 16th century, wherein they would have told the courts that, look, we are the deciders of what national security means. And what we say to be the national security is a national security that courts will simply follow. We don't live in that world. Today, the courts could very well say that, look, you are elected to run the government by a set of standards. Now, if those standards are too much for you, just resign and go home. Someone else will take your place. So the government of the day today is a democratically elected government, and it therefore has to honor the standards. And the job of a court is to lay down what those standards are. The Kerala High Court, a learned single judge and the division bench miserably failed in that aspect. And that also damages the democracy because it's entirely possible in the 1 year that it took for this matter to play out in courts. A lot of TV channels and their executives might have decided that, look, we simply can't criticize. We will have to be like a propaganda channel for the government. Because MediaOne was also sent out a notice some time ago saying why they've covered the Delhi riots in the manner they did cover. And of course, after public outrage, the central government withdrew the show cause notice within 24 hours. So in this context, I think what we have to essentially see in the judgment today is it's a big slap on the face of the central government. And it also is a great embarrassment for judges who rely on sealed covers. Now, please do not rely on sealed covers, because if the government says that they are doing this in the name of national security, please tell them that national security is not the sole, the government will not be the sole determinant of national security, and courts will double check that. And if national security is so much that the citizens of this country have to be divested of their rights, then perhaps it's time that the courts will tell the government to just chill out, just retire and then go home. Nobody is forcing you to run the government if you can't according to established standards. And those established standards were simply given a go-by by the Kerala High Court.
Okay, let me, Dhananjay, just a minute here. Let's get the view from the other side. Quickly going across to Anila Singh of the BJP, who is joining us on the broadcast as well. Anila Singh, all our panelists today are telling us, and this is their interpretation of what has happened in the Supreme Court, that this is a tight slap on the face of the government. Is that how you're looking at it as well?
If they want to see it from this point of view, they are most welcome to do that. Nobody can, frame their mindset or put the thoughts or the words in their mind. If they want to take it from this point of view, they can go ahead. But whatever the Honorable Supreme Court has said, we all have to honor it. And we very well know that there's a very thin line in doing something and not doing something, and doing something by saying and entertaining that this right has been given in Constitution. So Constitution also tells you about the duties as well. So definitely, whatever the Honorable Court
No, the duty of the press is clear.
we welcome it.
The duty of the press is not to be pro-government. The duty of the press is very clear. The Constitution doesn't tell us this, but the duty of the press is very clear. The duty of the press is not to be pro-government all the time. The duty of the press is to criticize. But when the press criticizes, like MediaOne did, look what happened. Their licenses got taken away. What were they saying? They were critical of the NRC. They were critical of the CA. Many people in this country are critical of the NRC and CA. How does this become a national security issue, ma'am? How can the government out of nowhere pull this card of national security and say, we are banning your channel, we will not let it go on air?
At least this government doesn't curse media at all, number one. And number two, it is a regular practice by saying that if an inquiry is done by any of the agencies, government agencies, they immediately start accusing the ruling government. That since we are doing or we are saying something against the government, that is why action is being taken by the central agencies. It is not like that. It is not like that at all.
Of course, it was like that in the MediaOne case, ma'am. The Supreme Court is saying it. The Supreme Court is saying that anti-government doesn't mean anti-national.
I force my mindset on you. In the same way, you cannot force your mindset on me. As I said, it has become a regular pattern that any action on anybody who is critical of the government is taken by any of the agencies. It is totally pointed out because we said this is this. For the government, that is why action has been taken.
But what has happened, the Supreme Court has overturned the government's decision, ma'am, of revoking the license. It's the Supreme Court. It's not me saying, Mira now saying, or one of our panelists saying anything. It's the Supreme Court that has overturned the government's decision of revoking the license of MediaOne and has been extremely critical of the way that the government has behaved. So I hope that the government is taking some lessons from it. Anyhow, Anilaji, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much. I hope to have this chat in the evening as well, and I hope our panelists can join us then as well. Tehseen Poonawalla, thank you very much for joining us. KV Dhananjay, good to have you on the show. Madhavan Narayan, thank you very much for being with us as well. With that, I'm slipping into a quick break on the show. News and updates continue. Do stay with us.